You don't get too much more basic than this, but we'll call this the base of home electricity because here's where it starts. First off, if you're not familiar with basic electricity and have been around it and done it, I would suggest you don't put your hands into one of these panels because you're getting a little more advanced work right now. That said, let's start off with a little wording on fuse boxes. Your old fuse boxes, that may be why you're looking at a new panel, under the mistaken notion that fuse panels are bad. A lot of home inspectors and or insurance companies have said during the sale of property that these fuse panels should be taken out and replaced with circuit breakers. There's nothing wrong with old fuse panels. Have you ever seen a fuse go bad? Not blow, but go bad. Has anybody ever seen a fuse go bad? All right. Has anybody ever seen a circuit breaker go bad? Okay, circuit breakers can go bad. So if you have an old fuse panel and they say change it because of some requirement that you can get around, I would say if that's the only case, keep your fuse panel because fuses don't go bad. Now, if something's wrong with your fuse panel, because most of them are old and have old cloth wiring in them and so on and so forth, if you had to wire the fuse panel, you might as well go to a breaker box at that point. Okay, but if you just wanted to change the amperage of some of the fuses, you can in fact do that. A lot of the old fuse boxes have in them what we call security fuses. They have a very small base on them, and there's an insert in that fuse block that changes it from a standard base to the security base. All these security bases are different. 15 amp is different from a 20 amp, is different from a 25 and a 30 amp. Okay, so if you wanted to, let's say, up that circuit from a 15 amp security to a 30 amp, you can in fact do it. Just be aware though that you're going to have to change the wiring in that particular fuse block. But there is a tool that can get those inserts out, all right, that we do sell, but it's not cheap either. But there is some way to get that out. Just be aware that if you try and jury rig something and you break that fuse block, there are no replacement parts anymore. So if you break a fuse block, or if it's already broken, you can't get replacement parts anymore. You haven't been able to get them for nearly 10 years now. Ever since the city of Chicago changed their code to say that now you can have emergency lights on a fuse panel, everybody just stopped making those fuse blocks. That was the only reason for those fuse blocks to begin with, other than the very old ones in the house. So if you need to change the amperage in a fuse block, it can be done. Just be aware of the gauge of the wiring and your amperage on your fuses. All right, that's it on fuses, by the way. The base of electricity. First off, we're talking about putting a new piece of equipment in. You're going to want to evaluate your old panel, whether it's fuse or circuit breakers. And when I say evaluate, measure, and identify that old panel. One, measure, I'm talking about amperage. First thing you want to know is, number one, what amperage is coming into your house. And number two, what your amperage draw is. And the only way to measure that is, in fact, with an amp meter, or what we call a clamp meter. It just clamps over the individual wires and will tell you what amperage is going down those wires or what draw. If you have a washing machine and a dryer and a dishwasher and your refrigerator and possibly air conditioners, I would turn them all on before you go and measure it. You want to get as high a reading as possible on what your house is drawing at any one period of time. The other way to do it is to go and take a look at your meter. All right, this is a meter head or a meter box, as the case may be. The meter's not in it now. The way to get into this would be to take the seal off, open it up, and then be able to pull the meter out, okay? Just to look at the wiring, you usually don't have to pull the meter out. Just look at the size of the wiring itself, okay? If you can see it. The size of a lot of real old houses will probably have a 60 amp service, all right? Chicago requires now on new houses 200 amp, but most remodeling jobs will start with a 100 amp panel. Okay, in Chicago, that means number 3 wire. It's relatively heavy. A 60 amp is number 6, okay? Much, much smaller. So if you identify that a small wire like this and you want to put a 100 amp panel in, you are now probably out of the picture, because now you require a permit and ComEd to reservice the house. Right? If you only have 8-gauge wire coming in from the utility pole to your meter, it's not going to hold 100 amp. So right now you're talking about hiring an electrician who has to pull a permit, because when ComEd comes out, the first thing that they're going to ask for when they see the new service heads in place and they have to pull new lines is, where's your permit? They're going to want to see it. So it's not something you can fool around with. So if you need to put a new service in, all right, you are talking about being, having a permit pulled down to City Hall. It's just the way it goes. Now, for an emergency repair on your service, if something happened to it, let's say the tree fell on it and it broke, okay, you can call an electrician in, he can fix it, and he can then pull what's known as a delayed permit. They can effect repair immediately, but then go in and say, okay, the repair's done, I still had to get a permit. That's measuring. Evaluate and identify what you have on your current panels. And why I say that, because when you start playing with the wiring, you're probably going to want to know where each one of those wires go. So what I would do is, when you get up in the house, you can put a tracer on any outlet and go down and find out what breaker end or fuse that goes to. So you're mapping your house is what you're doing, and identifying different rooms with different breakers. If you're talking about a light fixture, there's adapters you can have to screw into a light fixture that'll take the tracker, that'll do the same thing. So you can evaluate not only your outlets but your lights and find out, in fact, where those particular rooms are wired into your panel. I say that because a lot of old houses had people working on them, things get crossed, and you don't necessarily know what's what. I've seen, probably in looking at different panels, 90% of them that I've seen were mislabeled. So things get crossed as more people work on them. What are the requirements of your new system. What do you want it to do for you? Why are you changing the panel to begin with? All right, unless something just broke in your old panel and you have to change it. What I'm getting at here is this for an immediate repair, or is it in fact for future growth, and you want to do something to your house, okay, and up the amperage and put in new circuits? So you're going to want to know the requirements of what you're doing. If you're adding a dishwasher, if you're adding a jacuzzi into a bathroom, if you're doing these kind of things, you're going to be upping the amperage of your house. And is your old service, in fact, sufficient to supply the new amperage draw that you're planning to add? A modern house is going to take a lot more circuits than what was done even 30 years ago or more. A modern kitchen, at a minimum, should have at least 3 circuits run into it now. You have microwaves and things like that sit on the counter or wherever. The refrigerator should be on its own circuit. Countertops should be on their own circuit. If you have a dishwasher, that's its own circuit. And you start adding things together, and people say, well, I keep blowing the fuse in my kitchen because it's plugged. The microwave is plugged in with the refrigerator. Yep, you will blow the fuses, because modern microwaves, especially the big ones, take a lot of power, and your refrigerator is almost maxing out a circuit. So when you combine the two, you go over. You know, if that microwave's on and all of a sudden the compressor of the refrigerator kicks on, which it does alternately, you know, every couple of minutes or so, it's going to kick on. If you happen to be using a microwave when that happens, you pop the circuit. Now everybody says, well, okay, can I put a bigger breaker in? Sure you can. You're going to put bigger wires in too to make safety? Because when you start upping amperage on circuits, you have to match it with the gauge of wire. More amperage, bigger wire, heavier gauge wire. All right. So you're going to have to know what you want the new system to do. All right. Are you planning to remodel? Are you just adding new appliances in? What do you want it to do? And you have to know about what that amperage will draw compared to what you have now, and is your service capable of handling that new amperage? Again, if we get back to we'll know the service can handle it, you're back to permitting and ComEd and an electrician, all right, at least to get the service in. What is, in fact, you know, your wish list of the new circuitry compared to what you have now? Is it just to modernize the equipment and you're going to keep the same thing? That's fine. If, in fact, you're adding circuits, it's a lot more involved than just changing the panel box. Okay, what you're going to do, obviously, when you start, is you're going to have existing wiring in there that is going to have to be put into the new box. But if you're going to be adding new circuits, that means you're going to be actually fishing walls, you're going to be adding conduit, adding wire, and adding circuits. Before you pick a box, how many circuits do you want to end up with compared to what you have now? That's additional work over and above what we're talking about here today, but if that's your planning, then you have to pick your equipment to meet that future planning. So if you have, let's say, 6 circuits today and you want to end up with 12, I would, at some point, if you're going to 12, I would go with possibly, you know, a 16 or 18 space box at that point, just to get even future planning out of the way. because these projects always take on a life of their own, and you say you want 12 circuits, and then all of a sudden, oh, I forgot something. I just added an air conditioner to another room, and all of a sudden you need another circuit for that air conditioner. So you always leave yourself a little leeway also. In terms of amperage for a house, you can, by count, of the amperages as they're listed, go to 150% of the load of the house, because not everything is on at the same time. You know, most of the time, yeah, you could probably even go higher, but the code says 150%. So on a 100 amp panel, I could actually have breakers totaling 150 amp. In your planning, don't worry too much about the amperage of of what's listed compared to the total. Just be aware that you don't want to go over 150% and still meet code down the line in Chicago. Other municipalities may have different requirements. I'm just using Chicago code for a house. All right, so now we know what we have. Now we know what we want, okay? That is the basis of picking your equipment up. How do we change it? Again, if in fact we're talking about a one box for the house and or condo, you're going to have to kill the power coming into that box if there's a main breaker, all right? The only way to kill that power is back here. You have to open up the cover and pop the meter out, all right? And obviously you've only killed half the power in this box. I'll say, just be aware that the power coming into this box is still hot. We've only killed half of it when we pulled that meter out. Okay, so you can, from you know, the service feed going into the box is dead, but when you're working in here, this is still live and at full amperage. All right, so just be aware that yeah, you've killed the power to this box, but half of this one is still live. This box, the pipe going up the wall, and the head on that pipe are yours. They don't belong to ComEd, they're yours. The only thing that belongs to ComEd is the meter that snaps into this. All right, so if there's any changes there, you're responsible for it. ComEd is responsible for hooking up there from the utility to your head where it comes in and feeds here. That's their responsibility. Everything else, all that conduit on the side of the building is yours. And any changes, you have to pay for. All right. Now, to take the old panel out is relatively easy. Take the fuses that are out. You can if it's a fuse box, you have more or less disassemble it to get to the wiring, okay? With an old circuit breaker box, if you have something like a Federal Pacific or whatever that the insurance company says you have to change, all you're doing is popping the breakers out, disconnecting all the wires, all right? And then you can literally, you know, by switching all the nuts that attach to it inside, once all the wiring is disconnected, you can take all those nuts out and pull the panel out. Okay? It's as simple as that. Putting things back is not necessarily as simple as that. Once you have your old panel off, don't immediately throw it in the garbage and forget about it, because that is how the new panel has to hook up, by the way, because you're not going to be changing all your piping that goes in. So the first thing you probably want to do when you take that old panel off, depending on where the piping came in from, whether it's all at the top, if you're lucky, but in a lot of old panels, you may have pipes coming in on the side and the bottom, you never know, is take pieces of cardboard that match your new panel and scribe the holes of the old panel onto that cardboard. Okay, so now you've made a map of your old panel where the pipes are coming in at on the top. Let's say you have 5 pipes and they're all a little staggered. They actually met the pattern. Most new boxes will have some sort of pattern on the sides, on the back, on the top. All right, the new boxes don't match the old boxes, by the way. So you're not going to find a pattern probably to fit your the way the pipes are coming down. I'll just say down now, but probably you've got some things coming into the side. If it's flex cable, you don't worry about it. That can be put anywhere. But if it's piping, you probably want to map where those holes are. So I'm saying a piece of cardboard to fit this new, but put it onto the old and scribe where those holes are so you know where to cut a new hole here. Okay, and the way to do that, obviously, is once you scribed onto the cardboard, is cut that hole out of the cardboard, and then put the pattern here, mark this, and know where to cut. All right, don't just throw that old panel away because it's valuable at this point. When I was talking about, just removing the nuts from the old panel where the pipes come in, I'm just talking about these right here. Okay, these can be, once the wire is loose, all these nuts can be taken off, drop down the wire, and this panel can release from the pipes. All right. The reason I say map it is simply because these cutouts that you see in here and here will not match what you've got now. I can guarantee that. If they're close, pipes can move a little bit to snap into a new hole. But if it's half a hole or more off, and this is extremely hard to cut into solid and a cutout, okay? Usually you end up ripping, the insert out if you're cutting across holes like that. That's why we end up with what is a lot of times known as a wiring trough. Okay, this is not part of the panel. This is an add-on. The reason they do this is because now I could take that template that I've made from my old panel, put it onto a solid piece of metal without any punch outs on it, map what I have now, okay, and then proceed to cut those holes out to match the pipes that I've got coming into my old panel. That way it just fits in nicely. If you're trying to, jiggle pipes to fit this pattern, you probably won't be able to. You probably don't have enough room to wiggle the old pipes to fit the new pattern. So that's why I'm saying a lot of times it's easier to use a wiring trough like this, cut all my old holes from the top of the panel, put this in first, and then from there we can use, again, the new pattern on the new panel. I haven't cut custom holes here. All I did is get something close to what is coming in, because now I can jiggle my wires down the appropriate holes. Now, how did I cut these holes into this panel? Easy. I looked at it about where I wanted the holes to go down into the new panel based on the holes coming in from my old piping. Picked the closest holes I could, popped them out, and again, took a piece of cardboard, made a template, and then put it onto the bottom here and cut the holes accordingly. So when I put this piece on, it just fit where I have the conduit extensions. All right, but it's all careful measuring.
Now you have 3 wires coming in. Is that for 220?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll get to that. I was just getting to that. You can see, we'll open our tags up here. And you can see most homes, at least modern, will probably have a 240 volt service coming into it. Some of them still are down to 120, in which case you're going to have to call ComEd anyway and get your electrician involved and a permit involved. But if you have 240, it'll be marked as you see it somewhere along the line. If not up where it comes in, okay, at least you'll see white tape somewhere. You may be 2 blacks, okay, but you'll obviously see white marks on one of those 3 lines coming into your place. The white is neutral. All right. The red and black are your 2 hot lines coming in. Each one of those is 120 volt. Combined, they make 240. You probably won't be exposed to 3-phase wherever it is. But if you've ever been into a 3-phase box, the other color will be blue. So you'll have black without any markings, red, blue, and white. All right, that's a 3-phase system. You probably, no homes are going to have a 3-phase system unless you have electric heat for whatever reason, or electric hot water or something like that, which can get into 3-phase stuff. And that, again, you're bringing in ComEd. All right, so you see the same thing, you know, coming in and out of this box, red, white, and black. See the same thing coming in here, red, white, and black. All right, between here and here, there's probably a switch that can turn all this stuff off. All right, right now we pull the meter, it's off, and now you're feeding into the new box. You can see on this one, okay, it's got a main not at the top, but where a normal breaker would be. This, by the way, is one of the smallest boxes on the market now. The codes changed in '85. The new boxes are much wider than the old boxes. You have to be aware of that. So if you have a very narrow box, you're not going to find anything to fit. It's just a fact. So the new boxes are wider to give more wiring room in here, just based on not only Chicago code, but the National Electric Code. You can see how the main wires are wired. Your main wires could even come into here and then down also. So that's not a problem if you had to do that. Or come in the back. It doesn't matter where they're coming in. Just be aware that how they're wired. If you've got a main breaker, the 2 hots will go to the main breaker, okay, that is secured to the bus bar down here. And the neutral obviously goes across into the neutral bar. It's relatively simple. Now, in terms of tools, Again, you're dealing with a relatively hard wire. Some of the, if you're going to be doing this a little bit, sometimes, could you cut this with a hacksaw? Sure. We use special cutters. I mean, they're big cutters. None of these little cutters are going to go through this, or they're really going to have a hard time. But these, on the other hand, will, good for toenails too. Okay. The same thing with stripping this kind of wire to get it, just so nobody trips over it, to get it into the either the breaker or into the bars. A lot of times, since we don't have strippers to fit it, a lot of times what you have to end up doing is using a razor knife. And or you can use these and rotate it, okay, but that sometimes tends to cut into the wire. Put it on. So, razor knife comes in, or an electrician's knife, either one. Electrician's knife usually has a little curved blade, but either one will do. And that's as simple as that with the heavy wire. Sometimes, like I said, you can rotate this, but a lot of times that, if you're not careful, can abrade the wiring, and that could crack off. So just be aware that there are special techniques and or tools for cutting, and you're better off with a razor knife of some sort, just to cut through the insulation. And you saw I just around it, cut the slit off and just peeled it off. All right, new houses or remodeled houses and code requirement. Obviously, it's been a requirement for many years now for GFIs in your kitchen and bath. One of the newer requirements as of 90-something were arc fault breakers in bedrooms. All right, it's a very similar device. Now, in fact, we do have arc fault outlets that are available. They weren't available before, so you know what a GFI outlet is in your kitchen and your bath with the buttons on it. Now you can have an arc fault outlet for the bedrooms. The reason of the requirement for the arc fault is because most fires started with electric, just happened to start in the bedrooms where the bed was rolling over extension cords that were running everywhere. And they started shorting out and arcing, hence the term arc fault. Okay, they're arcing within themselves. They're on carpet. You're rolling, when you go to clean and vacuum under the bed, you roll it out. Well, you just rolled over the extension cord again. Now you roll the bed back. The wheel may be on the extension cord. You don't know. So hence the requirement for the arc fault breakers in the bedrooms, which has since been modified, at least by the National Electric Code. They want them everywhere. Well, in a new house, I don't know why they want them everywhere, since there's an outlet every 6 feet. Another requirement, by the way, even in the city of Chicago. But if you still have a lot of extension cords with things that can roll over them, yeah, arc fault breaker is required in the bedrooms. Now, what is the difference in wiring technique for a GFI and an arc fault breaker? There are requirements for the wiring if you wanted to install the breakers as opposed to the outlets. The wiring that this will feed, okay, let's say I only have one device, a dishwasher. From the GFI breaker to that dishwasher, I have to run a matched pair of wires. hot and neutral. Okay, because the hot and the neutral wires are both in this breaker. Okay, from the breaker, there's a lead that goes to the neutral bar. But the neutral wire goes into the breaker so this breaker can evaluate the voltage. All right? So it has to be a matched pair. If that neutral, in fact, is hooked to the hot of another circuit, which one neutral can run 3 circuits. But now you've got strange voltage going down that neutral that this breaker doesn't know. Okay? It can only evaluate what it's putting out and what's going back through it. So this breaker will keep popping if in fact that neutral is hooked into other circuits. Same thing with a GFI that will do that too. Okay, if in fact from the GFI outlet you're feeding other outlets, but all of a sudden some of those outlets have a different neutral on them, that GFI will read that difference and go pop, because it has to measure in and of itself. So you need a matched pair. Just be aware of that if you're installing those kind of breakers, that whatever circuits, and it could be multiple things, there could be a couple outlets, a couple lights on that, but it has to have the same hot and neutral going to those different outlets and lights. Same thing with an arc fault breaker, okay? It's a matched set. Now, arc fault is measuring not a loss of voltage, okay, mainly to ground. An arc fault is looking for a signature of arcing. That signature is going to cause the voltage to fluctuate, and there's electronic circuitry in that breaker and or the arc fault outlet that will recognize that arcing as it's looking at the hot and at the neutral. Okay, it's going to look and say, okay, that voltage difference is available in both lines. That means that something in that line is arcing and it'll shut down. The advantage of an arc fault breaker over an arc fault outlet is the fact that now it's testing all the wiring, okay? All the way from wherever your outlets are and your lights are in the bedroom or any other room now, all the way back through the wall to the breaker. An arc fault outlet will test from that outlet to your extension cords and your bedroom lights and your clock radio and your TV and, okay. Yeah, 100 things now. All right, so that's the advantage of GFI and arc fault breakers, is they evaluate all your wiring as opposed to from the outlet to the appliance or from the outlet to your TV or whatever. Okay, a little harder to install because they have to have matched wiring. Oh yes. GFI breakers and arc fault breakers are in the code, yes.